Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We'll start promptly at 1 o'clock, but I wanted to go ahead and let you know that you are in the right place if what you are here for is the webinar entitled Winter is Here, but Summer is Coming, Preparing for July 1st, 2024 Licensure Compliance. I'm Jenny Parks, and not at 1 o'clock. 11 o'clock, my apologies. Anyway, I'm Jenny Parks. I'm the VP of Policy and Research at the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, and we are joined today by Higher Education Licensing Pros. They are going to give us some more great information about staying in compliance with all of the pieces that are necessary to have an effective practice in professional licensure, disclosures, and other sorts of compliance. As a reminder, this is a recorded presentation and it will be posted to the MHEC website in the coming days. All the resources from the webinar will be available on the MHEC website as well. During the webinar, if you would like to submit any questions, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, not the chat. We will be monitoring those, and that's also where we pull those in the end and make sure we've answered all of them. So please use that feature rather than the chat feature. And then at the end of the webinar, you will also receive a survey to see how we did. So we will start very shortly. Thank you for being here. Hello, everyone. My name is Jenny Parks. I am the VP of Policy and Research at the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. Welcome to our webinar today. Our webinar is entitled Winter is Here, but Summer is Coming, Preparing for July 1st, 2024 Licensure Compliance. I will draw your attention to the chat. We have a number of the resources from today's presentation available for you there in links. So please take a look at those if you'd like. I'll remind you that this is a recorded presentation that will appear on the MHEC website in the days to come, as will all of the resources from today's presentation. If during the webinar or during the Q&A session you do have a question, please submit it in writing in the Q&A section, not in the chat, please. And I will repeat that because sometimes people don't remember that. Please submit questions via the Q&A section, not the chat section of the Zoom platform. It's in the bottom of your screen. And finally, at the end of the webinar, we will have a survey. We will ask you to complete that so that we know how we did and how we can improve. And once again, if you would like access to the presentation and other resources, they are also linked in the chat for you. So thank you for being here. I am going to go ahead and introduce our guest speakers. We are joined today by Higher Education Licensing Pros, Kalke and Kris Maul. If you've been at any of our webinars with them before, you know that they're fantastic. They provide an amazing service to help us all navigate the very choppy waters of professional licensure, disclosures, and other compliance matters. And in fact, the last webinar we had with them was so highly attended and there were so many lingering questions that we said, hey, let's just do another one pretty quickly. There's definitely an appetite for this information. So thank you for being here. You're doing yourself, your students, and your institution a service by listening to what these fine folks have to say. So I am now going to turn it over to Kris.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenny. Appreciate you having us here today, and thanks you all that are attending for taking time out of your day to hear more about licensure. You can see a little bit about myself up here on the slide, as well as my colleague Nan. We co-founded Higher Education Licensure Pros just over 3 years ago. really in reaction to the current requirements around licensure, compliance, and disclosures that went into effect July 1st of 2020. So here we are now, right, almost 4 years later, and we've got a new set of regulations related to professional and occupational licensure to deal with. So that's what we're going to be focused on here today. I just wanted to note right off the bat that this is a follow-up to a December webinar, as Jenny mentioned. You can find a recording of that webinar along with the presentation deck and a written Q&A document on MEC's convening webpage. So if you haven't already viewed that, you may want to do that after today's session at some point. So some of the information I'll be covering today is very similar to what we went over in December, but because this is kind of an evolving target here, since it is a newly published regulation, we're still getting information trickling out from Department of Education on exactly what it means. There are some differences in today's webinar versus that December session. So here's what I'm planning to cover in the next hour. I'll do a review of what those July 1 requirements are related to professional and occupational licensure. I'll do some examples. So how should an institution be applying the new regulations to your programs and the work that you're doing? And then I have some kind of tips on how to prepare for July 1, because while it is winter, at least for most of us, summer's going to be here in a blink of an eye. So I know you're all probably anxiously or busily preparing for this, along with many other things that are going to affect July 1st this year. But I do want to let you know there will be time for questions at the end. So as Jenny mentioned, please put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to cover as many of those as we can live today. And then I will be doing a written Q&A document afterwards as well that will eventually be made available through MEC's website. All right, so important kind of disclaimer here at the start. As I mentioned, this is an evolving target. These final regulations were published back in October of 2023. And as most of you probably know, regulation language is important, but it doesn't really give a complete picture, of what you should be doing as an institution. So there has been a little bit of additional information trickling out from the department through their staff, mostly through an email communication. You'll note on the presentation today that when I have information that I've received from the Department of Education staff person, I've highlighted that in red font on my slides, just to distinguish that from information that's coming directly from the regulation or from the published commentary that the Department of Education released back in October. So I'll explain that as we go, but just wanted to make note of that again, some of this is, really just information that's being emailed to folks when they inquire or ask questions to staff. All right. I did forget to note my other important disclaimer. This is not legal advice. A lot of this information will involve, different risks to your institution and to your students. And so it's important that you take all of this information in, but then that you're ultimately making decisions about how to apply that with your own legal counsel. All right, let's jump into Title IV regulations. Before I do, definitions or key terms, these are going to be really important as we walk through what these July 1 requirements are. So when I say licensure, or when the Department of Education says licensure or talks about licensure, really what that means is any sort of state or territory government issued credential to practice or work in a particular profession or occupation. So that can be called other things depending on the profession or occupation, and depending on the state or territory, it may be called a certification, a registration, authorization, etc. You get the idea. But really we're talking about, again, those state or territory government issued types of credentials, not the private organization ones. There are a lot of those out there, certifications, or again, certificates, authorizations, whatever. We're not talking about those. Those are not included in these regulations. Distance education is a critical term. I've got some information up here on the slide, and I'll talk more through that. But essentially, department staff is indicating that the May 2023 Dear Colleague letter applies here to these particular new requirements related to licensure, certification, and disclosures. And then initial enrollment's another important term. We're going to see that come up in a couple of different contexts with these new July 1 requirements. And we do have a definition from regulations, which I've put up here on the slide. We also know through the prior version of rules, again, that went into effect July 1 of 2020, that the department gave some guidance in their commentary there about what that means, that initial enrollment piece. So prior to an enrollment agreement or a financial commitment. So again, just setting the stage here, all of those are going to be really important terms as we dig in. On this slide, I have a summary, really, brief snapshot, a high level snapshot here of what these new requirements are. But I'm going to just start here for a moment because I think most of you on the line are probably familiar with the existing requirements, again, that went into effect July 1st of 2020. Those specifically require public disclosures and individual direct disclosures to be sent in certain instances and at certain times to different audiences. So those are still around. Those are not going away under the new July 1 requirements. You'll see here on the summary, there have been some changes, and I'll talk a bit about those in a moment. But there is a new requirement, and this is the most impactful for all institutions, and that's the PPA certification requirement. So again, you can see here on the summary slide, a brief overview of what that is, and I'll get into details here. But the high level takeaway is an institution cannot enroll a student located in a does not meet or a not determined state or territory starting July 1. So this absolutely could impact enrollments at your institution, depending on what type of program you're offering and where your students are located. And again, I'll get into all these details here, but wanted to start out with that high-level summary. So let's talk about this new PPA certification responsibility, because again, it is the most impactful to institutions within this new regulation package. So I have the language from the regulation here on the slide itself. You can read that at your leisure. You can, again, download this slide deck yourself if you'd like. There were links provided in the chat, so feel free to do that. But I'm going to skip in and dig into what the language is actually telling us here. So program participation agreement, I wasn't that familiar with this until these new regulations came out in October. Some of you may be more familiar with it depending on your work in financial aid or your role within your institution. So the program participation agreement is essentially a master contract or agreement between the institution and the U.S. Department of Education. It allows your college or university to participate in the Title IV program, which is the federal financial aid program, student loans for your students to access. So this PPA must be signed and agreed to on some kind of cadence, some kind of cycle of renewal. That's going to differ by institution, and it could be for a period of up to 6 years. Now, with that said, every institution needs to be ready by July 1st of this year to be able to comply with the new requirements. The PPA itself has been around for a very long time, and it's been added and changed to over the years. This topic that I'm talking about today is not the only new addition to the PPA. There are a couple of other very important things that were included in this October release of the final regulation that goes into effect July 1st. And that's related to accreditation as well as some consumer protection related pieces. So if you don't know much about those yet, I encourage you to seek out resources. I'll give a shout out to WCET SAN, State Authorization Network. They have a lot of information on their site about those additional areas of the PPA certification that will be effective July 1. So back to the focus for today, licensure. What does it mean with this new PPA certification responsibility? So every institution has to affirmatively certify that your licensure programs meet the educational requirements where your institution is located and where your distance education students are located. Then there is this little kind of exception or carve out where a distance education student could go through an attestation process if they live somewhere where your program doesn't meet. And I'll get into those details later. But the basics are where the institution is located and where distance education students are located. what does distance education mean? Well, as I mentioned before, Department of Education staff have indicated that the May 2023 Dear Colleague letter applies to this particular new regulation. And what that Dear Colleague letter indicates is that any student who is taking at least one course through distance education is considered enrolled in distance education. The department's further clarified, again through staff communication, that what they really mean is if they're taking one or more course online or through to distance education in the first semester or term of the licensure program. So if you have prospective students who will or could be taking one or more courses online during that first term, then again, department staff is indicating they would be considered distance education student. I know that is different from many other definitions that exist out there, including other definitions that the Department of Education uses, but this is the information we have as of today. And that's important because, again, going back to my previous slide, right, you have to be able to certify affirmatively, yes, this licensure program meets the education requirements where the distance education students are located. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about location here. Student location is still critical. That's something that you've been using at your institution for those direct disclosures between July 1st of 2020 and now. And it's going to be even more critical under this new PPA certification requirement. So each institution gets to set your own student location policy. There's not a specific policy or process that the Department of Education dictates. However, you do have a requirement to have an official student location policy in place for this purpose that you're going to be using to help you identify where your prospective students and students are located, and then apply that to this new PPA certification requirement, as well as to disclosures. For the PPA certification, really what we're looking at is the time of initial enrollment into that licensure program. That's the point in time where you're going to be setting that prospective student's location. And the department has clarified that this is going to cover new program enrollments or new program entrants on or after July 1st. So for some of you, you could have people that are starting classes at a much different time frame than that. But the key that we're going to look for is when do you consider them to be enrolling in that licensure program? If it's on or after July 1st, then this new PPA certification requirement would apply. Okay, I have a couple other points here related to the new PPA certification responsibility. There's some language within the commentary, and that's the lengthy comments that the Department of Education includes when they release a final regulation. So if you read through that commentary, there's a few things that I thought were very notable that institutions should be aware of as you're considering this new regulation. So the department says within their commentary that any prospective student who's going to be relocating or attending a licensure program face-to-face on your campus could be considered located on campus at the time of initial enrollment. So practically what this would mean is, if you have a student who lives in Kentucky, but they're going to be relocating to your campus in Missouri to do the program, you could consider that person who lives in Kentucky at the time they're applying to be located in Missouri, as long as they're doing all of their courses, on your campus, and face-to-face is the language that the Department of Education uses in this regulation. So important note here, again, from Department of Education staff, if that student could be taking one or more courses online during their first term, then they would be considered or should be considered a distance education student. So again, important point in time and opportunity to take an online course. Those are going to be factors of where you should be determining that student's location. Okay, again, for PPA certification, we're talking about that time of initial enrollment of the student into the program. So you're going to be certifying, yes, we meet the educational requirements for this prospective student at the time they're enrolling. So practically what that means is if that student later relocates to a state or territory where your program does not meet the educational requirements, they could continue in your program. They could stay enrolled. They would be eligible for Title IV. Your program would still remain eligible for Title IV. Essentially, the department says in their commentary, we don't want to penalize students, if they're changing their location in the middle of the program. If something changes, though, with a state's requirements or your program itself, and now you're in a scenario where you do not meet a particular state or territory's location, then you would, as an institution, need to stop taking new enrollments into that program. And you'd have to not take enrollments until you could meet those requirements. So again, whether it's a state has changed the education requirements or something's changed about your program, in those instances, stop enrollments right away. All right, a couple other things to note here about this new PPA certification responsibility. The department gives an example specific to teacher preparation and licensing around using a licensure compact or reciprocity agreement to help determine if you meet the educational requirements in another state. So I think that it's great that the department has pointed this out and recognized, that there are different kind of pathways to achieve licensure, which is absolutely true. I will say, word of caution though on using this. I don't think the department has opened the floodgates for institutions to just be able to rely on the fact that a compact exists for that profession, or that some kind of reciprocity agreement exists. It's still going to be important that you as an institution understand exactly what that compact allows your graduates to do, and that they could use that compact or reciprocity agreement as a recent graduate of a program to meet the educational requirements in another state or territory. So you'll see some language here. Basically, department staff is cautioning, be careful with this one, but it is something new that we haven't seen in that July 1st, 2020 regulations related to disclosures. Then the final point about PPA certification is related to this attestation. So as I mentioned before, institutions must be able to certify you meet the educational requirements where your distance education students are located, or where that student attests that they will be seeking licensure and employment after graduation. So this is kind of, again, a mechanism, an exception where you could continue to enroll students or prospective students, I should say, that are located and it does not meet state or territory. So again, in red font, you'll see some information that I received from the Department of Education contact. This really is about a student having one specific state where your program meets the requirements, and they have to attest in writing that they plan to seek licensure and employment in that one specific state where you meet after graduating. So unfortunately, this is not going to help all prospective students if they're not able to identify one specific state and able to put that in writing. Then you really shouldn't be enrolling them in the program anymore if they're located and it does not meet location. Okay, I'm going to shift gears now to disclosures. And as I mentioned before, we still have the public disclosures as well as the individual direct disclosures that remain in effect after July 1 of this year. So here's the actual regulation language, the new July 1, 2024 language related to disclosures. And I'm just going to break down a couple of things about that. So first, wanted to note the biggest change here is that Department of Education's removed the no determination made, or that not determined category. So you may recall today, under the July 1, 2020 regulations, institutions should be disclosing publicly if their program meets or does not meet, or if you've not determined yet if you meet the educational requirements in all 59 states and territories. I know through our work with institutions and talking to other folks, a lot of institutions have no determination made lists that are pretty lengthy still. And again, that is in compliance with the July 1, 2020, the current in effect regulations related to public disclosures. But the department's removed that for July 1 of 2024. So What is that going to mean practically? Well, I think a couple things. So again, the department's saying you must publicly disclose where you've made a determination if the program meets or does not meet requirements. There could be some scenarios where your institution hasn't made a determination, and you could choose to still include that in a listing on your website. There's nothing within the federal regulation that would prevent you from doing that after July 1, 2024. However, you shouldn't be advertising or enrolling students located in those no determination made states or the does not meet states. So again, department contact is basically saying, if you're going to be advertising to prospective students in any state, then you should know if the program meets or not, and then make that information available accordingly. My note up here is sometimes confusing, so I hope it's not confusing, but basically I'm thinking through different scenarios, right? And if you truly have a face-to-face on-campus program where there's absolutely no option for an online or distance education course during that first term of enrollment, then there could be a scenario where that program only has a disclosure for the state where your campus is located and maybe, a couple other states regionally or something. So your disclosure lists could become much shorter, again, depending on the particular scenario for the program and your students' ability to take online or distance courses or not. Direct disclosures, again, these are still here. Department has not really made many or any substantive changes really to the direct disclosure language, which in some ways is unfortunate because we do have a bit of a disconnect between the direct disclosure language and the public disclosure language now and how those interplay with the new PPA certification requirement. So just as a reminder, again, this is under today's regulation that went into effect in 2020. You do need to send a direct disclosure to a prospective student if they're located in a does not meet or a not determined or haven't made a determination state or territory. This needs to be sent prior to that student's enrollment in your program. So the challenge, I think, with this is under the new July 1, 2024 regulation, right? We all know now that you should not and cannot enroll students if they're located in a does not meet or not made a determination state or territory. So I think the most likely scenario is your students who get this particular direct disclosure, these prospective students, would need to go through that written attestation process in order to enroll in your program. So this group of students is going to be receiving more communication from your program and institution prior to enrollment, and will have to go through that written attestation process in order to enroll. And I do apologize, my language here kind of fell off this slide, so I will try to fix that and get that updated. But basically, the department staff has said this does not just apply to distance education students. They've made it clear that this is going to still apply to all students. However, most likely we'd be talking about distance education students who would need or be required to receive these. Okay, so a little bit more here on individual direct disclosures. Current students, again, under the existing that went into effect in 2020 regulation, must receive a written disclosure within 14 calendar days if something changes and they are located in a does not meet state or territory. This could be because the student changes locations, or again, something might change with the state's requirements or with your program. Either way, if that student is now in a does not meet scenario, the institution needs to send direct disclosure within 14 calendar days. That still exists under these new July 1, 2024 regulations. And as I mentioned before, if the student's changing location, they're not going to lose access to Title IV. They can continue being enrolled in your program. If it's the other scenario where the state's changed or your program's changed, again, as I mentioned, you'd have to stop new enrollments, but that would not impact your current students. So the department also has said, again, through email contact with their staff, that this probably would apply to distance education students, but not exclusively. So there could be scenarios where you would need to send this to a student who's not a distance education student. Okay, so I know this is very hard to read on the slide, but this is a quick snapshot document that we created that really tries to, again, at a pretty high level, walk through what the new steps are under the July 1, 2024 requirements. So this walks through that PPA certification piece, as well as communicating with disclosures. So this has been made available in the chat. There's a link to this. If this is helpful for you, feel free to download it, use it, share it at your institution or elsewhere. But again, just high-level snapshot of what you need to do in order to be able to comply with these July 1 requirements. And now I wanted to shift gears and do just a few examples quick of particular programs and how you would, applying the steps that are required, be able to understand what's going on with those programs. So on this slide, you'll see a flowchart that we created. There is a link to this flowchart separately as well that's in the chat that you can download and use as you see fit, if that's helpful. But I'm just going to walk through the programs here on the left, kind of walking through the flowchart and how that would shake out for that particular program. So the first example that I was going to wanted to go through today is a Bachelor of Science in Information Technology with a focus on cybersecurity. So when we're kind of starting this analysis of, how does this program fit in? We start here. Is it a licensure program, right? So first we have to identify if it's a licensure program or not. And the kind of key metrics we use for this is, has the program been designed to lead to a professional or occupational license, or is it advertised as leading to a license, or advertised as resulting in employment opportunities that would require a license? So in this case, for information technology cybersecurity, there is no state issued license, or again, certification, authorization, whatever the term may be. There's no state issued license at this point for that type of profession. So there are lots of private certifications that someone can achieve in cybersecurity or other aspects within information technology. But because there's no state or territory issued license, then we're in the no. This is not a licensure program. So this one's real easy. You don't need to worry about it. The new PPA certification doesn't apply. No disclosures are required. All right, let's move on to the more challenging ones. BS in nursing is the next example I thought of. So is it a licensure program? Yes, this program, a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, it's specifically designed to help prepare people for a registered nurse license, and it's advertised very clearly to do that. So we're in a yes scenario here. Okay, public disclosures are going to be required for all states and territories where the institution has made a meets or does not meet determination, right? So you may need to update your current public disclosures, especially if you have a lot of states as the not determined. You'll have to decide if you're going to move those into one of those meets or does not meet category, or continue disclosing not determined. For direct disclosures, first we think about the prospective student individually. Are they going to be taking one or more courses through distance education during their first term of enrollment? If the answer is no, then you go to your student location policy. Does your student location policy put that prospective student as located on your campus? And if the answer is yes to that, then because they're located on campus, and I'm assuming that your RN program would meet your home states, your campus states licensure requirements, then no direct disclosure would be required, right? So that one is, again, pretty straightforward, assuming that your student location policy specifically says we're going to be treating prospective students attending our face-to-face on-campus program as located in our state. That would get you to this yes. If your student location policy doesn't treat this prospective student that way, so they're not taking any online courses, but your policy maybe uses mailing address or current home address at the time of application, then you could be in this no situation. So in that case, a direct disclosure would need to be sent prior to enrollment. Again, if they're in a does not meet or not determined state or territory, right? So I'm gonna, I think, flip over to the next one here. Marriage and family therapy. So in my head, I was thinking, let's say this is a partially online program, right? So students take, let's say, more than 50% of the courses online, and then they have to do some kind of face-to-face experience at some point in the program. So first question again, is it a licensure program? Yes, this is designed to lead to marriage and family therapy. And it's clearly advertised as that. So we have to keep going down the flow chart. Public disclosures would need to be on the website for all those states and territories where the institution has made and meets or does not meet determination. And then for direct disclosures, we look first for prospective students. Will they be taking one or more course through distance education during their first term? Yes, in this scenario, these students will take one or more course online during their first term. So yes, a direct disclosure is required and it must be sent prior to enrollment if they're in a does not meet or a not determined state or territory. Let's just say we have a student that's in a does not meet state, but they want to enroll in your program. Well, for this, then you would need to go to that written attestation, right? So if they're located and it does not meet, they can still enroll in your marriage and family therapy program as long as you have a written attestation where they clearly indicate, I want to seek licensure and employment in this one particular meets state after I graduate from your program. And I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip my last example here, but you all get the idea. So hopefully this visual is helpful as you're thinking through your own programs and what these requirements will mean to you after July 1. Okay, so how can you prepare for July 1? Again, we all know summer's going to be here real soon. So I think the first order of business is confirming your institution's list of licensure related programs. And remember, the key here is going to be, is it designed to lead to a license, or is it advertised as leading to a license, or even some sort of profession or occupation or job opportunity that requires a license? I think that last one is the most tricky to suss out and identify, but I do think it's really important, especially in light of the new PPA certification requirements. You don't want to have any programs that seem like they should be on your licensure list if they're not really a licensure program. So it's worthwhile to go through and kind of do that audit and review of your own institution's programs and how they're being advertised. I'd say the next most important thing is figuring out where your current students and your prospective students are coming from, right? So again, the new requirements are all connected to student location, and that's very important, again, because you must be able to certify, yes, we meet the education requirements where that prospective student is located. So if you at least know where your current students are located, as well as any prospective students who may be in that admission process or that inquiry process in some fashion, that's going to give you a good picture of which states and territories you need to be able to make a meets determination for. So that's second most highest, or maybe first highest priority is know where your students are. Okay, excuse me, I'm going to take a quick sip here. So after you have your list solidified and you know where your students and prospective students are at, then the next step is to complete the research. You know, what are those educational requirements across all the states and territories where our students are located? And then compare your specific licensure program to each state and territory's requirements. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This work takes a tremendous amount of time. So for any of you on the webinar today who have been doing this or have been coordinating it for your institution, you know that it can take hundreds and hundreds of hours to do the research and then to compare the curriculum for all states and territories. Again, You do have to make a meets determination though, in order to continue enrolling students located. So there's no way around this work. It is something that each institution needs to do and be able to have that meets determination made prior to July 1. All right, a couple other points here, how to get ready, how to prepare. It's really critical again to know that you have a student location policy that's going to work for your institution under this new July 1 requirement. So you may have a student location policy in place already that you created after or before July 1 of 2020 related to the current disclosure requirements. Be a good idea to review that, right, and assess it and see if anything may need to be changed in light of the new PPA certification requirement and that distance education definition that the department is using at this point. And I just a couple notes here, again, that face-to-face on-campus prospective student, if you'd like to be able to treat them as located in the state where your campus is, I would encourage institutions to specifically include that in your student location policy. So then it's very clear to anyone who's looking at that policy how you are treating those prospective students. Calendar is going to be important for this work too. So I think you all know this, but licensing requirements can change over time. So this unfortunately is not going to be a one and done scenario. When you're doing that research and making those comparisons, it's something that will need to be revisited on a regular basis. Kind of when we work with institutions, we say an annual review would be a great place because there are other things on an annual review or annual renewal cycle with Department of Education, and you want to at least be able to say we've looked at this, at least once within the past year. So make your own calendar or update your calendar with those annual review dates because it will be something important on an ongoing basis as you recertify each time through that PPA agreement that you meet the educational requirements. And then finally, documentation. Like most compliance related things, documentation is going to be critical, especially should you ever be audited. Even if you're not audited though, documentation could be helpful if you're renewing for other purposes, such as your own state's approval or authorization of your program, or if you participate in SARA, the State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement. There's some considerations related to licensure within current SARA policy, which may be updated in the future to reflect these new July 1, 2024 requirements. So having your documentation in order is really important. I'd especially recommend that you retain copies of whatever it is, a spreadsheet, a Word document, whatever, where your curriculum is being compared to the state and territory specific requirements, where that meets or does not meet conclusion comes into play. Retain copies of that. And then, of course, any kind of direct disclosure that's sent to a specific student, you'd want to be able to pull that back up at any point in time, should you be asked to produce it. So make sure that the disclosures, as well as that written attestation piece, that is tied to that specific prospective student or student's record, and that you're able to reproduce that or bring that up should you ever need to do that in the future. All right, I'll just have a couple more thoughts and we're going to switch over to questions. So location policy, I've mentioned it a few times here today, but again, it's even more important than ever because of this new PPA certification requirement. So as you're reviewing your location policy, here are some things you can think about that we have up on the slide here. Again, really important for new PPA certification as well as the direct disclosure piece. And finally, who's going to help you with this work, right? Because I'm sure a lot of you on the line today, you're kind of a one-person team. Maybe you have a few colleagues, but you're working towards compliance in so many issues, and this is just a sliver of your responsibilities. But unfortunately, it's a really important sliver that needs to get done. So who's going to help with this work? Definitely connect with your financial aid team. So because this new program participation agreement certification requirement is being added July 1st of this year, there's someone on your financial aid team that certifies that PPA every time it comes up for renewal. So make sure they know about this new licensure requirement and that that's going to be on PPA moving forward, and that they understand kind of what's happening behind the scenes in order for you all to make that affirmative certification as part of the PPA. Your academic leaders absolutely need to know about this work and what's required, and allow the people that need the time to take the time to do it. And again, I know this is really hard because everyone is stretched so thin with so many responsibilities, but there's just not a shortcut around it. That research needs to be done to know what the educational requirements are, and then your specific program needs to be compared to it in order to make a meets determination. And that means that you will have to involve your subject matter experts, which usually are the faculty. Again, I know they're extremely busy, they're already stretched too thin, but you need someone who knows the details of the curriculum itself to be making that comparison in order to be able to say you meet the educational requirements. And then your IT department. So for a lot of these things, there are probably going to need to be system changes or flags, added to certain steps in the process in admission, or even connecting to the direct notifications. You may need to have some IT work. So connect with them as soon as possible. I know most institutions, it takes a while to get an IT project rolling, so you'll want to do that straight away if you haven't already. And then finally, just wanted to point out a couple things about us. So Higher Education Licensure Pros, we do work with colleges and universities around the country to help with this work that's needed. We offer an online database called the Bookmark of educational requirements across all 59 states and territories. And we've got actually closer to 70 license types now that are available. So if you'd like more information about the Bookmark or the services that we can provide to institutions, feel free to check out our website. And now I'm ready to shift to questions. So as we're getting Jenny back on here to help with that, I mentioned, the education department staff person. I've been connecting with her. Name's Vanessa Gomez. I've included her telephone and email. You can reach out yourself to Ms. Gomez with questions. And I believe that she's been pretty responsive. I know she has been to my questions, and I think she has to others as well. So I encourage you to reach out directly to her with any questions about this as well.
Thank you, Kris. As always, it's highly informative, and unfortunately, it raises as many questions as it answers, though. So I think we have a record of 64 questions in our Q&A section. So we're going to try to tackle them as best we can. I'm hoping that we'll begin to see that some overlap. I did see that in the chat, someone had put a question there. Can you go ahead, please, cut and paste it into the Q&A section? Because that's going to be a lot easier for us to keep up with answering those questions there. So if we are ready, I'm going to go to question number 1 here from anonymous attendee. The new regulations pertain to initial enrollment. Are there any remnants of existing regulations that would require us to provide individual direct disclosures throughout the course of the student's time with the institution? Or can we shift our individual disclosure processes to focus on initial enrollment only?
Yeah, that's a great question. So unfortunately, there hasn't been a change with direct disclosures. So if you have a student who's changing locations while they're enrolled in the program, you would need to send that direct disclosure within 14 calendar days. Or if you have a scenario where a state changes their law or their requirements, or something changes with your program, maybe you hold a specialized accreditation and then something happens and you no longer do, then you would need to send a direct disclosure within 14 calendar days. So short answer is you have to keep doing that. You cannot just tie it to initial enrollment.
Great, thank you. Here's another one. Initial enrollment gives me heartburn. I can with 100% certainty determine that a student will be located in my state at the time that classes start. At time of, quote, initial enrollment, they may be located in a state where our program doesn't meet the requirements, but they will be moving to my state to take classes. Can we enroll this student?
Yeah, so I'd say again, kind of thinking through the flow chart, the first question for you would be, will that student be taking online or distance education courses during their first term of enrollment? So kind of not even factoring in where that student is physically located, if they're going to be taking a distance education or online course during the first term of enrollment, you would need to be able to say, yes, we meet the requirements where that student is located. If they're not taking an online course, then it becomes a little easier because you can consider them under your student location policy. If you add that language, you can consider them to be located where your campus is. And so in that instance, again, I'm assuming that all of you would be able to say, yes, our program meets the educational requirements where our campus is located. So I hope that answers it. But basically, I understand your heartburn. And so I would encourage you to think about your own institution's understanding of initial enrollment. And it might be helpful to get something in writing and possibly even an official policy around that, or include it within your student location policy. But what the department has said is, initial enrollment is some time period before financial commitment to the institution is made. So I hope that's a little bit helpful.
Thank you. All right, third question. For distance education, is it only courses related to the licensure program, or are we to also consider general education courses the student might be taking?
So unfortunately, the Department of Education contact has said it's any course, so including gen ed courses. Now, I will say kind of one thought around that though. This applies at the time of initial enrollment to the licensure program. So if you have, undergraduate students coming in that are not declared as a major yet, they probably wouldn't fit under any of this, right? It's only at the point in time when someone is being enrolled into the licensure program itself that these requirements would come into play.
Thank you. Does it matter in the quote distance education unquote designation for a student if the course they're taking online is not a program course, but a general ed? You just answered that. Great. All right. Sorry, I didn't realize that would be the same question. All right. Next one. So if the student is on campus in Michigan, where the college is located for all classes, but unable to take an English class due to the time conflict, they are now considered an online student, even if they never take another online class, for example, nursing. And where do we find the educational requirements, since most governments say, quote, meets the requirements of the board of whatever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a good two-part question. So I'd say first part of the question, you have a student who is relocating to your campus in Michigan. They may end up needing to take an online course because there's no in-person sections available. What do we do? Is that person a distance education student? I would say under the information being received from Department of Education staff at this point in time, yes, that student would be considered a distance education student. So then what that means is wherever they are located per your institution's student location policy at the time of initial enrollment, you would need to be able to say that it meets the educational requirements, that your program meets the educational requirements. Your student location policy may be set up in a way where that student would still be considered located in Michigan. That seems like a much easier scenario. Or your student location policy may treat that prospective student as located where they're currently residing or where their permanent address is at the time. So you really do have to think through those things and how your institution's student location policy is going to play out in these different scenarios. The second part of the question around how do we even find the educational requirements in other states? So it can be very frustrating. Many times the state or territory boards or agency's website itself doesn't have clear, complete information. So what our process at Higher Education Licensure Pros and what we recommend to institutions is you really need to start with the law. So it's looking at state statutes and regulations and rules Typically, between that, somewhere within the law, you're going to find specific educational requirements if they are required. In some instances, professions rely on specialized accreditation of programs or some other external approval, like from a state nursing board, for example. That information should also be pretty clear in the law, and that would give you the direction you would need to know, are there specific courses, and internship experiences or whatever that we need to compare to? Or is the state relying more on specialized accreditation, like, for example, CCNE for a nursing program? That's going to be the information you need to know about each state so that you can make that meets determination.
Got it. Thank you. What if a student is concurrently enrolled in face-to-face and online courses?
So again, under information received from Department of Ed staff, if it's at least one course that they are enrolled in online during that initial first term of enrollment, they're considered a distance ed student.
All right, I think this is a redundant question, but let's make sure. Even if the student is in Missouri and attending classes face-to-face on a campus there, if they're also taking one online class, they are considered a distance education student, and the institution has to ensure alignment with requirements in another state, say Kentucky. Is that correct?
Right. So again, this would depend on that institution's student location policy and exactly what that policy says and how it's applied to the student who sounds like would be moving from Kentucky to Missouri. But yes, as I mentioned, it is possible that a student who's going to be taking mostly all of their courses online at your campus could be considered a distance education student based on the information we received from Department of Ed. But the meeting the other state's requirements is only going to come into play, again, depending on your own institution's student location policy and how you're treating those students.
Got it. So here is another scenario. We are in Michigan. Our accounting program doesn't accept students from Louisiana. A student from Louisiana attends the program in person on our campus, but they take a general education class online. It sounds like we would be in violation, or we can't accept accounting majors at all from states we don't accept because they may take an online course in their first semester. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think I understand the question here, but essentially, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but this is going to depend on your institution's student location policy and how you have that established. I will just make a side note here about accounting. Accounting produces its own new set of issues and problems. I didn't give an accounting example this time, I did back in December. But essentially, my understanding of accounting is no bachelor's programs in accounting, or very, very few, are going to meet the requirements for CPA, Certified Public Accountant, because every state requires 150 semester credits to be a licensed CPA. Again, virtually all bachelor's programs are less than 150 semester credit hours. So for accounting, you may need to rethink how you're classifying this program. Does it actually belong on your list of licensure programs? As long as you're clear about what it's designed to do and you're advertising that in a way that's very clear. So for example, our program is 120 semester credits. It takes 150 to be licensed as a CPA. This program may help you earn the credits, but it will not allow you to become a CPA. Something along those lines. If you're very clear about it, then I think that you can remove a bachelor's in accounting from your list of licensure programs. Again, because it's not designed by itself to meet the requirements for CPA. And as long as you're not advertising it as meeting the requirements, you would be clear for that.
Great. And thank you. Yes, I know all of these are very nuanced, so that's why I'm reading them anyway. So thank you. I understand from the new rule that even if they are residing on campus, enrolled in a licensure program, and take one or more online courses in the first semester or term, then we need to count them as a distance education student. What if they wait and take an online course in their second semester or term? Does this rule count them as distance education students?
Ms. Gomez has said no. Second term and beyond does not matter. It's really connected to that first term. If it's online during the first term, that's when it counts.
Got it. Thank you. I'm just checking our time here. Okay. If a state or territory changes requirements and we no longer meet requirements, it states we must change their program to meet new licensure requirements. Does that mean we would need to change requirements for that catalog year and previous catalog years? Or would it just be the new catalog year going forward? If it would be going forward, would we need to update the students currently in the program to the new catalog year to be in compliance for the new requirements?
Right. That's a great question. I'm thinking through how this practically would play out at your institution in this scenario. So thanks for that. Yeah, so it would technically, what it would happen if a state changes their requirements and you no longer meet, you would need to stop enrolling new students into that program. You could continue to have students who are already enrolled finish the program and they would remain eligible for Title IV. Your program would remain eligible for Title IV. So I think short answer to your question is you would not have to change your existing current students into a new catalog in order for them to remain in the program. But if you want to enroll more students that are located in that does not meet state or territory, you would need to change your program to meet that state's requirements before you could start enrolling again. So you would have a scenario here maybe where you've got a group of students doing an older version of a program that doesn't meet. Again, recall direct disclosure requirements. If it changes to does not meet, you're going to have to notify all current students within 14 calendar days. So you would have had to tell them, hey, the state changed the requirements, we do not meet. You probably, a lot of those students want to be licensed in that state, so they may want to change to the new catalog that will meet the state's requirements, if that makes sense. So you would have some shifting and adjusting to do there. But for Title IV eligibility, for those students that are already enrolled, they could stay enrolled in the older version of the program and remain eligible.
Okay. All right, I think we have time for one more question. How do we handle students that change programs? The student lives in another state and in a program that does not require licensure. The next year they change programs to a program that does require licensure, and we do not meet the requirements in that state. The student has some credit, but is, again, going to a new program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, this is connected to point of initial enrollment in a licensure program. So you would not be able to enroll this student in that licensure program unless they can provide you a written attestation that says they intend to seek licensure and employment in a particular NEETS state.
Got it. Well, thank you so much. We have many other questions here, but Kris has agreed again very graciously, very generously to answer these in writing, and we will send out the questions and the answers in the coming weeks as those documents become available. So stay tuned on the to the MEC website. We're going to be doing some updates to some of our resources and reaching out probably this spring to ask you some more questions about how MEC can support you in your professional licensure practice. Kris, Nan, thank you so much. I appreciate all of your generosity and hard work, and thank you for making it a little less painful to do this work.
Thank you again for having us, and look forward to continuing answering your questions. So thanks everyone for participating today. Take
Bye,
care.
everybody. Thank you.